I don't want to say crunch. We have some, yeah, we have some people that will be jumping off. So let's, if you want to go ahead and get started, it looks like we most likely have a quorum. So
let's do it. If we got a quorum, I think that's perfect time to start. So I'd like to welcome all those in the boardroom down there as well as those online. It's the March 12th, 2024 meeting for the Wasatch Front Economic Development District Committee. I'll be chairing. Obviously, we have with us Vice Chair Mayor Nguyen. Let's start, since this is the first meeting of the year, and just do some introductions. I don't think we have a lot of new members, but it's now a good opportunity for those members to reacquaint themselves. So if we could, let's start with those in the boardroom, and then Rosie, I'm going to ask you just to go through and announce those online so we can kind of keep this in order. So let's start in the boardroom. Andrew, do you want to start? And then we'll go around. I think everybody knows you, but.
Sure. I'm Andrew Gruber. I'm Executive Director at Wasatch Front Regional Council. You want to, Marcia?
yeah, I'm Marcia White. I'm the Economic Development Planner here.
Hi, I'm Mike Moore, new to this council, representing Hill Air Force Base. I'm the Director of Staff for the installation. Thank you.
Muriel Sochimil with X Factor Strategic Communications.
Hi, I'm Paul Hacking, the president of Tula Tech, here with my friends Debbie and Chris.
Jordan Chandler with Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Rosie Hernandez, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Tim Watkins, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Christy Dahlberg, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Madison Aviles, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Byron Head, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Matt Ryan, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Hi, and I'm Meg Townsend, also WFRC Community and Economic Development Director.
Great, thank you. Did we miss anybody, Marcia, or everybody in that boardroom got introduced?
Yeah, everybody's here.
Good.
Oh,
Rosie, could you just
got a
go through
couple
our
coming in.
online people?
You bet. We have Bryce Wartzberg with Swazo Business Center, Mayor Debbie Nguyen, Chris Roybal, Ellen's iPhone, Chris Lone, Amanda Tullis, Ginger Chin, Julie Snowball, Dave's iPhone, Karen Lang, Mayor Lang, Nick Fritz, Gwen Curvin, Sherry Stevens, Susie Becker, Sarah Tolliver, Kelly Bush, Amy Edwards, Christina Oliver, Greg Bisping with EDC Utah. And we just had a couple of members walk in if they'd like to introduce themselves.
That'd be great.
Blaine Fackrell, Morgan County Commissioner.
Steve Gale, Morgan City Mayor.
Great. I think that takes everybody, doesn't it, Marcia? Rosie?
Yes.
All right, with that, let's start with this little business first. So based on the Wasatch Front Economic Development District bylaws, we are required to ratify any new appointments and appoint the chair and vice chair of this committee. That would be myself and Mayor Nguyen were approved by the full WFRC Council as chair and vice chair. But those appointments are basically in your hands, need to be ratified by this committee. So with that, I would look first for any action for the appointment of the chair and vice chair for this coming year. We need a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion. This is Chris.
Thanks,
I'll
Chris.
second it.
And we have a second. I'm going to place that motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? I'm going to rule that motion carries. Thank you very much for that, Chris, for the motion. Let's now go to the approval of the minutes, which was December 13, was our last meeting, 2023. And I'd look for a motion to approve those minutes, which you should have received.
I would move for approval of those minutes. This is Karen.
Thanks, Karen. We have a motion.
I'll
I'll
second.
second. This is Ginger Chin.
Thanks, Ginger. We have a second. All those in favor, I'm gonna place the motion. Please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you very much. Any opposed? I'm gonna rule the motion carries. Thank you very much. Let's go to
Chair?
the next. Yes,
Chair, you know that we've got a couple of new members. And I
Yeah.
think maybe just really quickly, if they could, a lot of us know each other, but maybe the new members could just introduce themselves and where they're from, maybe.
great. That's a good idea. Do we know who, are they there in the room? Are they online or both?
We've got a couple in the room, I think.
Okay.
You,
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Moore. I'm representing Hill Air Force Base, and I'm the Director of Staff for the 75th Air Base Wing. The 75th Air Base Wing is one of 55 different organizations at Hill Air Force Base. I work for Colonel Jeff Holland, who is the installation commander, and we're just very excited to be here and participate in any way we can.
Thank you for being with us, Mike.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Guess I'm an alternate to Commissioner Fackrell, but Mayor Gale from Morgan City.
Welcome. Appreciate it. Marcia, anyone online?
Yeah,
New
there's
members?
there's a few people. I see Mayor Bush online, I think, or they keep moving around.
I'm Mayor Kelly Bush. I represent Kearns, and I appreciate this opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, anybody else that I'm missing? Let me
Thank-
just,
So I'm Gwen Kervin. I'm with the Department of Workforce Services. I'm kind of replacing Mark Nold, who is retiring. So
he can't retire, but we're
Yeah.
glad that you're here.
thank you.
Bryce, I think you're new to this organization.
Bryce Wurtzbaum with Swazo Business Center, and I am a fill in the temporary at this point, but may need more appearances.
Anyone else that's?
This is Mayor Mon from Syracuse.
Oh, thanks, Dave's iPhone. Welcome.
Anyone else, Marcia?
I think Greg is also new, so Greg from EDC Utah.
Yeah, thanks for the invite today. I'm Greg Bisping with EDC Utah. I direct our community strategy.
Great.
I think that looks.
Thanks,
everybody-
Greg.
Yep, it looks like everyone else has at least been here a few times, so.
Perfect. Hey, I just like to say thanks for all our new members, bring some other expertise and outside information to this committee that's very important to us. Obviously, I think one of the major benefits that I see from this committee over the years is that we get to share information across the northern part of this state that can benefit us all. We can share those ideas, and you'll find that we take quite a bit of action in this committee, and I welcome those. And if anytime you have input, please know that feel free to contact myself, Mayor Wynn, Marcia, Andrew. We're all here to make sure if you have any questions on any of our meeting items or any of our future, please don't hesitate to ask. I think sometimes there's a tendency to get a little overwhelmed with all these committees. So we just want to make sure you're welcome and your input is very valuable. So with that, anything else, Marcia, before we move on? Andrew? We
Nope,
good?
Go ahead, Chair.
All right, so just one item that I wanted to share as far as the chair's report is related to the overall economic opportunity within our region, which is the Wasatch Choice Vision. I think for those members that have been around a while, they've all heard about it. It's really a great tool that we've been able to refine over the past number of years, past 3 or 4 years that I'm aware of. And the 4 key strategies of that Wasatch Choice Vision starts with transportation. We know how important transportation is to economic development. Housing choices, obviously, and I think we'll get a report from Ginger Chin and Andrew here, the impact on housing for economic development and how seriously the state legislature took it this last year. Parks and public spaces that came up, and also the city and town centers that was developed, probably even more refined through the SIDS process we went through this past year. We find that those 4 components really make up that Wasatch Choice vision. As the WFRC works with the local communities, partners, stakeholders, really develop those key strategies. I think that's the important part to remember with these strategies, is that this just isn't 3 or 4 people sitting in a room coming up with these. They've reached out to basically every community that we've seen across the Wasatch Front to get their input and develop these strategies before we actually implemented those in the SIDS. And those key strategies and tasks are detailed out in the 2023 through 2028 SIDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, that really augment those strategies and put them to work. And so you'll probably be hearing a lot about those and how those strategies will be put to work over this next year. And really looking forward to not just this year, but through 2028 as we move forward with this committee. So I just want, and then if any of our new members have questions on the SIDS, on any of the strategies dealing with the Wasatch Front vision, Wasatch Choice vision, please feel free to ask. So with that, I'm going to go to public comment. We're going to hear from Ginger and Andrew here shortly. Is there any members of the public that would like to make a comment before we move on?
So Chair, if I
Go ahead.
So I just want to, before we move on to public comment, I just wanted to really emphasize, and you did this quite well, but I want to emphasize that we went through this process. It was almost a year-long process through the SEDS process, and trying to come up with comprehensive economic development strategy, and coming up with tasks that actually support the Wasatch Choice vision. So we know that good economic development and economic opportunity rolls up into good community development and transportation and housing and all of the things that we are working towards on those 4 strategies. And so I just want to keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward through our process of implementation of some of these tasks. So thank you, Chair, for bringing that up. Anything else that you'd like to say, or you always have something to say?
Well, Marcia, that rung true. Marcia, thank you.
That was endearing.
Thank you very much. I do, we talk about the Wasatch Choice vision here at WFRC, and I again want to echo what Commissioner Frohr said, that this vision for how we can grow as a region is not just from WFRC, but it really reflects the joint work of all the transportation agencies, UDOT, UTA, WFRC, and MAG, the cities, the counties, the chambers of commerce, other private sector organizations and community groups who have come together and recognize that the great quality of life that we have in Utah is not something that we can take for granted. Over the past decade, we were the fastest growing state in the nation. And with that growth comes opportunity, but also challenges: housing affordability, transportation, traffic congestion, air quality issues. And if we can continue to be intentional about how we grow, that growth can actually help enhance the quality of life instead of degrade the quality of life. But it takes coordination. And that's what the Wasatch Choice vision is. A vision, and Jordan dropped a link to it in the chat, but it's a vision for the entirety of the Wasatch Front, where over 80% of Utah's population lives. For, as we look out decades into the future, where can more housing be built of different types, housing options, and what transportation systems can be enhanced to provide good mobility? And Chair, as you said, making sure we have parks and open spaces woven into our communities, and then a development strategy which creates more opportunity for development to occur in centers, city and town centers. And there's no one size fits all. What may work in Morgan City is not going to be the same thing that works in Ogden or Salt Lake City. Each community has to make their own decisions about how to grow, but these principles of housing options and transportation choices and centered development really apply across the Wasatch Front and across Utah. And those things that we've been talking about, it's not directly economic opportunity, but to close this out and bring it back to where Marcia was saying, the comprehensive economic development strategy that this group worked on over the course of the past year, that was independent financial analysis. And that analysis pointed to the centers-based strategy in the Wasatch Choice Vision itself being a great strategy for long-term sustainable economic opportunity. Because if you're an employer and you're trying to thrive, if there aren't good housing options, if people are stuck in traffic congestion all the time, if the quality of life isn't good, then we're not going to be able to attract or be able to retain talented workforce. If people don't have access to opportunities from their home to easily be able to get to jobs and school, et cetera, then that degrades their quality of life. They spend more on transportation, they spend more on housing, and that hurts businesses and it hurts individuals. And so this Wasatch Choice Vision in of itself functions as a really good strategy for promoting economic opportunity. And it gets at, particularly for those of you who are either private sector investors or if you're local governments and you're making decisions about how your communities grow, the design of your communities for quality of life and long-term economic opportunity. And that's all embodied in the Wasatch Choice Vision. So I think, Mr. Chair, what we try to do here is marry together that economic strategy with the broader development strategy, so we're all rowing in the same direction. Not saying that anybody's trying to dictate what you do in your individual communities, but have collaboration between state and city and county and region and private sector and public sector all working towards common goals.
Yeah, and I would agree with that 100%, Andrew. And in my mind, if you're in the public sector at all, if you pay attention to what the state's doing, the growth issue, I think, is one of the biggest issues we deal with across the Wasatch Front. And the Wasatch Choice Vision really gives us a blueprint, and understanding that it's different in every community, just as you stated. But it gives us a blueprint for your commissions, your councils, the public to be informed, and then make the decisions that they feel is best for that community dealing with growth. And that growth encompasses all those things from transportation, housing, all the way through that Wasatch Choice Vision. So I'm a firm believer in that. Anything else, Marcia or Andrew, before we move on?
Nope, you can move on. Thanks.
All right. So let's go back to public comment. I don't believe we had anybody that wanted to, but Rosie, anybody online that had a need for public comment?
I don't see anyone online or here in person.
Great. Thank you, Rosie. All right, let's go to our next agenda item, which is Economic Development 2024 legislation, which deals with our 2024 legislative session that just ended. It was probably one of the more active legislative sessions we've seen. We saw a lot of things come out in different arenas. One of the key players in that arena, of course, is Ginger Chin. She's been around for quite a while. She's Vice President of Public Policy. And I'm going to let her, she's online with us. I'm going to let her introduce herself, her background. And again, she's been down the legislature for quite a while. I remember her seeing her face down there a number of years ago. She's no newcomer to this. And I think she can give us some good insight to what may impact the Wasatch Front, what may impact this committee dealing with that legislation. And then Andrew, I think you wanted to also weigh in on that from the transportation, other bills that may come through. So Ginger, welcome. If you want to take a few minutes and go ahead and tell us what we've found out from the legislature this year.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Also, I'd like to point out, I was at the Hill. You said many years ago, I was like 12.
Yeah, well, that's at my age, that's a while.
Okay. Well, so as we all know, the session wrapped up March 1st at midnight, and that feels like light years ago, but in reality, it was a week and a half ago. And this year there was 591 bills passed, which is a record amount of bills. I think last year this beat the record by 16 bills. So, you know, that upward trajectory of bills, it's actually a real trend. This was one of those years where we kept hearing that this was a tight budget year. We heard it from the beginning. This is going to be a tight budget year. It's going to be a tight budget year. Senator Stevenson said it's one of those Christmases where you get socks and underwear. So you get what you need versus what you want. And I think that held true in some cases, but I think that our legislators were quite generous as well. So I'm just going to jump into a couple of bills and then I'll turn it over to Andrew. He's going to handle housing and transportation, and I'm just going to cover the general economic development type bills that the Salt Lake Chamber that we've been watching fairly closely. A couple of bills that really dominated the media as well as a lot of our attention the last bit of the session was related to sports. So 2 big sports bills were introduced and they passed. So House Bill 562, which is Representative Wilcox who sponsored this. This was the Major League Baseball bill. And I know many of you on this call were really heavily invested into this Major League Baseball bill, but it allocates funds for a state-owned stadium within the Power District. And that Power District is off of North Temple, owned by Rocky Mountain Power. Several key elements were proposed in this bill, including raising the transient room tax and statewide car rental taxes to help fund this project. And this bill drew a lot of opposition from stakeholders. They said, hold up, why is everybody in the state paying for a baseball stadium in Salt Lake City? So with a lot of changes in the bills, how it ended up coming out is it's a 1.5% increase in car rental taxes and the ability for the district. So it's going to establish a Fair Park district versus an authority, but they operate very similarly, a district and authority, to raise sales tax revenue within. I think it's important to note with this that this funding mechanism is only contingent upon acquiring a Major League Baseball franchise. So a lot of people are saying, oh, this is going to raise our taxes right away. But the reality is it's contingent upon getting a franchise. The second major league bill is the hockey bill. So if you've watched that one's been pretty interesting as well. This bill is numbered Senate Bill 272, is sponsored by Senator Dan McKay. And it proposes, well, it actually establishes a reinvestment district spanning about 9 blocks in downtown Salt Lake, right around the Delta Center. So unlike the baseball bill, this is a little bit different. This one will be funded by a sales tax increase by Salt Lake City residents. So it's a little bit different than the other funding mechanism for the Major League Baseball. And again, it's if a team is acquired. There is flexibility here as to whether they'll construct a hockey stadium or renovate the Delta Center to retrofit to accommodate both the National Hockey League and the NBA games. So stay tuned for that one. It's an alignment with the infrastructure for the Olympics as well. So that's some pretty exciting developments for Salt Lake City. Now, moving on to some of the other conversations.
Ginger.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just interrupt you to interject
Please.
just for 1 second before you leave baseball and hockey. Because two notable points, relevant points, I think, for this. One, I just want to make clear, because you mentioned the tie to the Olympics. It was interesting. There was an article in the newspaper this morning where the IOC, International Olympic Committee, specifically said, we might use those facilities if they are there and the Olympics come to Utah, but don't say that their facilities are being built for the purposes of the Olympics.
Yeah.
And I think it's a notable
Good
point.
point.
We want to be careful. And you didn't say that, but I just want to make sure that everybody's clear about that point. The second thing I would note, just while you're on that area, for the Power District area, the proposed site for Major League Baseball, another legislative thing that happens, there was an appropriation of $500,000 to UDOT, actually to pass on to Wasatch Front Regional Council for us to do a joint transportation analysis, joint meaning WFRC, UDOT, UTA, Salt Lake City, about the transportation needs and possibilities in that Power District Fair Park area associated with the possibility of baseball, but not just baseball. There's anticipated to be a significant amount of development in that area, which has tracks already. It's, hits 215, I-15, I-80, all sort of proximate to that area. And so to do a transportation analysis of what enhancements might be needed to make sure that people coming in and out of that area for baseball or otherwise can get in and out in a way that doesn't gum up the entire transportation system, and also has a positive as opposed to a negative effect on the residents in that area. So Ginger, thanks for letting me interject before you
please
left that.
do. And interject anytime. These bills are they're so technical, they're in the weeds, and I'm providing high level, but it does impact so much, including the Jordan River, the west side. It's really fascinating to watch the conversations around these bills. Well, I'm going to move on to the Great Salt Lake. If we're talking about economic development projects, obviously the Great Salt Lake is going to take some forefront. This was fascinating to me in that last year and the year prior, Speaker Wilson at the time, who obviously is no longer there, really took a leadership role on the Great Salt Lake. And I thought, well, with Speaker Wilson gone, is that going to continue? And I really have to say that Speaker Schultz did not let us down. He emerged as a real prominent advocate for the Great Salt Lake. So as we know, the Great Salt Lake is a terminal basin, which means water goes in, but it doesn't go out. And so this makes conservation efforts very critical and crucial for our state. And one bill that came out that I just thought I'd bring awareness to is House Bill 453. It was sponsored by Representative Casey Snyder. And this bill is the first time that it's really said to our mineral companies who extract minerals that they're going to start imposing taxes on the minerals that they extract, so the money goes back into the Great Salt Lake, as well as when there's lean years of water, they're going to be regulating the usage during lean years. And so I think that was a big initiative to help with the Great Salt Lake. And also with water, a leadership bill that was sponsored by Senate President Adams as well as Speaker Schultz is creating a generational water investment bill. So it establishes a governing body dedicated to water management. And I know many of you on the call, that's super important for you all. And a way to explore new water sources and to address scarcity and challenges. So it'll create a commissioner as well as a water commission. And it's tasked with innovative approaches to water management. So stay tuned for that one. I mean, that's TBD, I think, on how they're going to implement that. But water is obviously super important to this group as it relates to economic development. I have a couple of other topics I wanted to just touch on. Homelessness. So downtown, I know obviously the Wasatch Front Regional Council's downtown. I'm downtown right now. Homelessness is big, but it's not just a downtown issue, it's a statewide issue. And I think our leadership was really coming out strong to say, yeah, we know this is a statewide issue. We need to approach it from a statewide perspective. So $62.5 million was allocated towards homelessness and wraparound services. So we've seen it. You just can't throw money at it. You have to actually have services. With a notable portion of that money, about $25 million to low barrier shelters. So getting people in right away. There's a lot more to the homelessness funding, but I think it's important to mention here how that's significant for the state as it's a statewide recognition. One thing that I thought was really interesting in relationship to homelessness was a creative approach to funding mechanisms. Sorry, I might need to shut my door. There's people back here. So there was a measure introduced for liquor store patrons. So consumers have the option to round up their purchase at the liquor store and to the nearest dollar, and the proceeds would go to the Pamela Atkinson Homeless Trust Fund. So if you are a liquor store patron, you can round up and some of your funding will go towards homelessness, which I thought was super creative on behalf of our legislature. Any questions? And I can keep going. I have just a couple more topics I wanted to cover, then I can turn it over to Andrew to get to transportation.
Ginger, I don't have a question on homelessness, but I just want to acknowledge the collaboration between the public and private sector to tackle this issue, which you said is not just a Salt Lake City or a downtown issue. It really is an issue that affects everybody. And Michael Parker is here with Do Good and the Utah Impact Partnership. Did I say that right? And just a lot of engagement from the state and from the Salt Lake City and other local governments and the private sector. And I think that's a great, if we're going to address this issue successfully, it's going to take sort of all hands on deck to do it.
And I know Michael can speak to this more, but there was a $15 million match on behalf of the Utah Impact Partnership, which is huge for our public-private partnerships and for the private industry organizations to step up.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Ginger. I just colored to say that I think the building a better emergency room isn't really fun work. And so we've been working on doing that for about 10 years in Utah, about how we build a better emergency room for these folks that just kind of fall through the systems. And so I would tell you there's some systems work that helped accomplish some big things this year. One is we adopted a new state goal of functional zero homelessness, which is as many people leaving the system as going out. We've never had that. It's just been a black hole. We've just kind of said, we're going to throw money at an emergency room and see how we do. Now we're going to measure progress. And so I think that's meaningful for Wasatch Front Regional Council and the Economic Development District, because that's an outcome of system failure by tenfold, those people that we deal with at the bottom. And so the work we do here is so important, actually, because everything you do to make housing more affordable here saves magnitudes of money downriver. And so it's inordinate that our philanthropic and civic community pledged $15 million to go along with the state. That's their second pledge in 3 years. So it's a total of $30 million they've pledged over this period. So it's inordinate, but I would just color that. I think the most important thing that I observed up there is, again, building a better emergency room is really dumb. So it just is. I mean, we need to do it. We need a safe place for people to go. You need the baby at the fire station. I don't understand why homelessness isn't just part of our public safety conversations, but different day for that one. I'll simply say that everything we do to make economic opportunity or housing affordability, anything we do, and particularly focused on our middle class, because our middle class is very vulnerable now. So like everybody that was vulnerable, super vulnerable because of inflation, housing costs, and our growth. Not to mention where you have a bunch of other cost pressures coming in, but our middle class is getting nailed now as a state. They're just getting nailed. And so the question is, can we get incomes up fast enough to keep up with this pace of growth? Can Paul do it at his cool technical college? Because he does cool stuff at the technical colleges. But like, what are the instruments to get ahead of the problem instead of managing from behind with better emergency room? And so I love this conversation and would just say, I think the legislature really wants to lift out of that emergency room mentality and much more into a prevention mentality, but you can't do it without fixing the net at the bottom if you care about everybody in our community. And I'm proud of our state, because as I watch other communities grapple with this issue, you kind of see a very progressive version of it's gotten way out of control and we don't know what to do with it. That's in Oregon. That's happening right now, real time. And then you have a much more ignore the problem mentality in other places. And I'd say Utah is solving the problem, and that's cool. So that's my final comment.
Thank you for those. Ginger, go ahead.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about energy. I think energy took a lot of the forefront of the conversation at the session as well. So Utah, as we know, we have a history of embracing various energy sources. We've always said, all of the above. But I think that this year there was a real commitment to diversified energy production. Some of our bills scrutinize the utility of coal to retire the coal-fired plants, like keep them around. We need, low-cost energy. And obviously, when we're talking economic development, we're going to consistently talk about energy and this prevailing belief that transitioning to renewables too soon is probably not in Utah's best interest. I mean, that can be argued across the board. But House Bill 191 and House Bill 374, those were both bills delivered by Representative Colin Jack to keep that balance in the forefront and think about energy balance. I do want to talk a little bit about education, but I'll touch on it briefly. There's not enough time to talk about education. There were over 100 education-related bills introduced during the session, and obviously education is our largest allocation of budget. But the primary focus on these bills was funding for essential aspects such as classroom supplies, teacher salaries, support for student teachers. I didn't know this, but student teachers do not get paid. So there was a bill to have student teachers get paid, and eliminating general fees for secondary schools. I was at a panel recently where people were coming forward and they're saying, I can either pay my bills or I can pay school fees. So I think our legislators acted in good faith to eliminate school fees. And then finally, I'll just talk about taxes. Our lawmakers reduced the state income tax again this year from 4.65 to 4.55 and made it effective retroactively to January 1st. So there was spending and saving and moving the budget around. But I think this year, our state is really focused on growth and how do we maintain sustainable growth, as Michael referenced. So that's all for my report.
Hey, Ginger, before you go, I know there was a lot of housing bills that were brought forth, and
Yes.
housing obviously becomes pretty important. That's part of our Wasatch Choice vision. Anything jump out to you on the housing bills that came forth? There was quite a few.
There were a lot of housing bills, and when Andrew and I decided to slice and dice this legislative presentation, Andrew was going to take housing and transportation, and I was going to take the general economic ones. I can go into housing, but Andrew, I'll turn over to you, and I can add some comments if that works.
That's great. Andrew, so
Thanks.
you might give your viewpoints on housing as well. So,
Up to, yeah, thanks.
Andrew, go ahead. Thanks, Ginger. Don't go away.
Thank you, Commissioner, and Ginger, thanks so much. Again, I feel like I say this all the time, and it's worth repeating how terrific the partnership is between the public sector and the private sector. It's embodied in this committee. It's embodied in the collaborative relationship that our organization has with the Salt Lake Chamber and the other chambers of commerce. And it's embodied in the work that we do hand in hand at the Capitol on many of these important issues. And I will, as you said, Mr. Chair, I'll hit on a few issues related to transportation and housing. And
Great.
I'm going to do that. I'm only going to use one slide here, just so I can keep it together. And that is summarizing transportation. And then I'll turn to housing. And I know I've got some friends. I saw Christina Oliver from DWS and others who can help me on housing legislation. But transportation funding, it was actually another significant year for investment in our state's transportation infrastructure. And that starts with the primary state fund for investing in transportation is the TIF, the Transportation Investment Fund. This is a fund that principally gets revenues from the state sales tax, and it is governed by the State Transportation Commission, which prioritizes the use of those state funds mainly for key roadway capacity projects. And that fund had an increase, as you can see here, transportation funding, an additional $775 million was put into that in one-time funding. So additional funding this year out of general funds. And then the ongoing funding into the TIF was increased by $330 million. So that will be money that repeats every year going forward. So if you're good or even just passing at math, you can count that's another $1.1 billion this year into transportation, mainly transportation capacity for our state. Now, the intention or expectation for that is that those funds can be utilized, at least in part, to pay for the cost of existing debt that the state holds, bonds that were issued to pay for transportation projects in previous years, and the state is still paying off the debt on those bonds. And the reason that that's notable is that using these appropriations to pay down some debt means that the money that comes in normally into that transportation investment fund can go to projects instead of to debt service. So it provides more funds. It also will help with inflationary impacts. The inflation that we've experienced in sort of all of our goods and services over the course of the past year has gone up a lot, but it's gone up even more in what we call the construction cost inflation index. So the costs that are associated with doing infrastructure projects has gone up even faster than the overall. Sorry, Michael? It's the construction cost inflation index. And I don't, if you're asking me what the percentage increase is, I don't have that off the top of my head. Yeah. So those funds can help pay off debt, can help inflationary impacts, and it also may enable the acceleration of some projects that are already identified to be funded between now and 2030 over the course of the next several years. So if you think about this from an economic perspective, this is the state investing in our infrastructure, making more money available for more infrastructure projects. And as I look around the virtual room and the literal room here, I know that there's nobody in either place that would say, our community couldn't use more investment in infrastructure, right, Commissioner? Yes.
Exactly right.
So I said commissioner, and every commissioner said yes. So it's good for our investment in our infrastructure. It's also, of course, good for a key component of our economy, which is the construction sector. But I think more important even than that is just making sure that we have a well-functioning transportation system that can move people to accommodate the growth that we have. And Ginger, I'll note the Salt Lake Chamber and the other chambers. I saw Chris Roybal on here also, have just been such great leaders in saying we need to invest in our future. So that's the way that I look at that TIF. I'll spend less time on the other items. The TTIF, that's the Transit Transportation Investment Fund. That's a state fund that goes into transit specifically. And the state put an additional $45 million, again, on an ongoing basis. So it's not just this year, it's every year going forward into the TTIF for enhancements to commuter rail. The front runner system is the backbone of the transit system. So to continue investing for that, key to move people around the region, essential for the Olympics, really great having a balanced investment. That builds on the investment that was authorized last year for trail projects in the ATIF, the Active Transportation Investment Fund. So multimodal transportation choices approach. Point of the Mountain Transit Stop, another $50 million towards that project. I saw Alan Matheson on here, having transit serving the point is really critical to having that come to fruition. And then other funding for transportation projects as well, scattered around. I'll just say for transportation funding, it's really terrific because we have a unified transportation plan, which marries with the Wasatch Choice vision that identifies priority transportation projects needed around the state. And these funds will help us advance that unified transportation plan. So let me pause quick and see anybody have any comments or questions about transportation funding? Michael?
Can you just clarify on the new money, the 335 that they held, the ongoing? Did they do 335 last fiscal year as well? Or was it just set aside and then applied to this year?
Yeah. So
just clarify the ongoing and then the 775 at the same time. It's just a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
And number two, in terms of the ongoing, have we gotten 2 years or 1 year of that money?
Yeah. So 1 year. What Michael is getting at is that actually at the end of the last legislative session in 2023, the legislature essentially said, we are going to plan to set aside out of the future year's revenues, $1.1 billion for investment in transportation infrastructure. And so, Michael, you're saying like, well, wait, did that get counted? And this adds on to this. What I just described, the 1.1 billion, is the coming to fruition of what was planned in 2023. And then it was money that was available in 2024 and that actually was appropriated for transportation. Some of it one time and some of it ongoing, but one starting this year going forward. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just think there's more money behind.
If you're going to say something, you have to speak into the mic, please.
I would just add that my perception is that there's more money behind that money. Like the legislature was intentional in trying to park money in infrastructure smartly, and there seems to be more capacity for funding behind that.
I mean, we'll see. Just to be clear, what the legislature did is what I described. And then we'll see what happens in the future in water infrastructure and transportation infrastructure and funding for housing. Speaking of housing, we'll hit this, and then I think Chair will be done with our portion. If anybody else wants to raise anything, they're more than welcome to. On housing, another very notable year, and I'll borrow a line from our friends at the Utah League of Cities and Towns, who made a suggestion that was generally adhered to this year, that the approach that the legislature take on housing be partnership, not preemption, meaning that the legislative actions did not impose mandates or use sticks, if you will, on what local governments do, but rather created more tools for the local governments to work in collaboration with the private sector to create more options for housing. One of these items, for example, was the creation of a new financing tool called the First Home Investment Zones, which would use tax increment financing to help communities develop centers. We talked about centers before, but at least 30 units per acre of a mixed-use center for housing to be created in areas that are not right next to high-capacity transit stations. We have the HDRZ, Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone tool for that. This is it for other areas and cities that make sense to do a center of development. They're up to, at least 30 units per acre. The great thing about this tool is that it's flexible. If 30 units per acre is too much for your community, that can be reduced by creating additional housing elsewhere in your city. That's mainly single family owner occupied, at least 6 units per acre. So it's a flexible tool. By the way, everything that I'm talking about is included in a legislative wrap up that our staff did, Miranda Jones-Cox and our staff did, that is already dropped at Jordan, I think dropped into the chat already. So that's a financing tool. There's another similar tool. So we've got HDRZ, we've got FHIZ or FIZ. Then we've also got the HOPS, Home Ownership Prosperity Zones. This is in areas that are under 10 acres that you can do a smaller use of tax increment financing to, if a city zones to increase housing density to at least 6 units per acre, tax increment can be captured. So all sorts of tools to meet the circumstances that may apply in different areas. There's HB 476, streamlined local building permitting and approval processes. HB 465 made some modifications on what cities can regulate in terms of sidewalks and landscaping, and increased funding for the Olin Walker Affordable Housing Revolving Loan Fund. HB 13 created infrastructure financing districts to allow community landowners to access the public bond markets to borrow at lower interest costs, and then that debt would be paid off as soon as the homes are sold. So there's a lot there, but as you can see, it's mainly tools and resources to help encourage the development of homes, particularly owner-occupied housing. So, Mr. Chair, again, lots there, and I'm looking, Christina, or if anybody else wants to supplement what I've said on housing policy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add a couple of things. We did pass modular housing for both multifamily and single family. So now we have a state code that everyone can abide by. So that will be run through, I always say, this is where my dyslexia comes out, DCFM or
DFCM, right.
DFCM under the, in collaboration with the building official, the state building official, of course. And so they will be standing up that program over the next year. It's going to be extremely exciting, and hopefully efforts with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and others involved in the process will result in some additional manufacturing facilities being brought to Utah, which will significantly reduce the price of housing, especially in rural Utah, where we have so much trouble attracting the talent for all of the different areas that we need to build a home. So, and then Representative Waldrop worked closely with Spend Love to get that new, are we calling it the Hope Z? There were too many acronyms that came out of this one. But let's see, we're calling it the Utah Homes Investment Program. So this is a treasurer program. This will take $300 million of funds and invest it with developers to write down the cost of the interest rates that they're currently borrowing at. They have to pay it back within 24 months, but it will hopefully kickstart some of the projects that have been stymied. And that's an exciting thing.
Yeah, Christina, I'm really glad I forgot to mention that one, and that former Representative Waldrop spearheading that to get at the point that our interest rates continue to be higher than the historic norm. And by providing lower interest loans, it can enable projects to move forward that would perhaps otherwise be sitting on the sidelines right now. So that's a short-term, tool to get projects moving, right?
Yeah, and did you go over the infrastructure districts?
Very briefly.
Right. It's just another tool to basically these infrastructure districts. I'm just going to totally simplify this. Can be created, and certificates of occupancy on the homes that are in this district won't be issued until the bond for that particular lot has been paid off. So again, it'll help with developing that original or the stubbing, not only to the property line, but stubbing to the lots, if you will, which has been a barrier for development as well. So it's property tax, and no, it's not property tax increment. Sorry, this is just a bonding process. So
Christina, thanks for letting me put you on the spot. Ginger, I don't know if you want to add on to that for housing, or if anybody else wants to comment on anything legislatively.
I think you guys all have it covered. It was a great year for housing, actually. A lot of collaboration, and hats off to Dunnigan for his work on the infrastructure district. That was a tough one last year, and he got it passed this year.
Andrew, can I make a question for you? This all feels fast and heavy, but I think a lot of these things have been worked on for a year or longer. Could you color how much of this you think's been informed by the Wasatch Choice effort and how much has been informed by the SEDS effort? And then it is fast and heavy during the session, but could you just color a little bit on that? And then second, are we making housing so complex that you have to be the world's most sophisticated developer to figure it out?
Well, I'm happy to briefly tackle those two, and anybody else can weigh in. First of all, Michael's saying, like, is this all sort of new and just comes out of nowhere? And the answer is no and yes, in my view. I mean, some of these tools are ones that we've been working on developing for years. The one that I started with, the First Home Investment Zones, or the FIZ, builds upon the very successful Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone tool that has been working now. And it just says, let's take that model of encouraging mixed use development of housing and centers, and then, but that's now only around high capacity transit stations, and come up with a way to do that in other places that it makes sense. So it's taking an existing tool and applying it elsewhere, but consistent with the principles of the Wasatch Choice vision, which is creating opportunities for growth to occur in centers, coordinated with transportation. So in some ways, it's new tools like that, that build on past efforts. Then the tool, like, for example, that Christina was just talking about the new $300 million available for short-term loans, that was put together quickly, but it's just recognizing the current economic conditions that we're facing. So it's a quick tool that was built that provides lower interest financing for developers to get their projects done. And to your question about whether this is complicated, I think, yes, some of it is complicated. And most of these things are aimed at local governments and developers partnering together. They're not aimed at sort of an individual homeowner. And so the idea is that, yes, it's going to take some expertise, I think, to put these tools to work. That was true for HTRZ also. It took a while for that to get off the ground. But the hope is that with groups like this and the chambers, and other developers and the great firms that we have, we can be working together to say, here's an area that could be developed, and here's a way, let's figure out a way to apply the tools to those particular projects.
Thank you.
I'm hopeful.
And I would just color that if you get a matrix over time that helps color where the tools overlap or don't, or I just think at this point, it goes to the growth coordination conversations that you and I were involved in, that there's a lot of this that it's not necessarily we need more, it's just we need to align what we have, and capital's not a problem, or XYZ is not, we don't know the constraints that are actually the problem anymore. And then we're overlooking great things like the folks funded a hypersonic workforce initiative at Weber State for $2 million. And that's going to make Hill Air Force Base so happy on workforce. So like we spent a lot of time on the Wasatch Choice elements, but there were other things that happened at the session that were really top of spear economy. And I bet Muriel was involved in some of those with the point and other things that I think in the future are worth highlighting in this group.
Great. Mr. Chair, I see Christina's got her hand up, and anybody else?
I do too.
Chris, you want to go first?
Just want to touch on a couple of those housing things that I want to make sure, number one, that I understand it. One of the things that I liked most about the $300 infusion in development capital is, one, it's not going straight to developers. It's going to financial institutions that will structure that as part of their financing. It's almost a buy down of the interest rate, much like we do in the residential sector. I like that. The second part I like of that, which wasn't mentioned, if I understand it correctly, that's money that might have been invested elsewhere outside the state's borders is now going to stay home and help Utah. And what I've characterized it as an epidemic in our housing, as the governor did, and I didn't steal it from him. He didn't steal it from me. That's just our reality. All these little tools working together, they seem like they're really sophisticated. They're not rocket science. They sound really cool and they have really cool acronyms. But there's something, as you heard, several of those things were for smaller projects, less than 10 acres. In my little city, in Mayor Wynn's little city, we've got lots of little infill areas that we can't really do much of a development under our current zoning. But all of a sudden now we can put the plan together and create some, I'm going to use the D word, I'm going to say density. And in an area where it really isn't making any sense to do anything else. But now all of a sudden we have some tools that can make those little infill areas that aren't practical to develop, developable.
And I absolutely concur with what you just said, Chris. There was, of course, a fiscal impact or assigned to this, a fiscal note assigned to this particular bill. So that the working language, basically, we're taking 300 million from our investments, which are global investments for all intents and purposes. And then the foregone cost, was added as a fiscal note. Now, where that actually came out in the budget, I haven't gotten through everything quite yet, but that was the theory was, well, we should be earning this percentage, but we're taking 300 million out. So we're only going to earn a fraction. What happens to the foregone revenue that would have been collected had it been invested elsewhere? But really keeping the Utah dollars within Utah, making a difference here is ultimately the best choice. And the bill passed. Others agree that this is really going to be monumentally a monumental shift for these smaller developments.
Absolutely.
As for a grid or some sort of educational material, that is on my list of things to start getting folks together from the various parties. So there were some changes in the RDA, CRA, ERA, what other sphere, we're calling it CRA now, but all of the old ones as well. And so we'll be working with Danny Walls and his group to put together some information on that, the league, of course, and UAC and Waldrop. So we do hope to have some sort of information put together. And the timing of that, I can't tell you because we're just kind of wrapping our head around what we need to do so that we can educate our local municipalities and unincorporated counties as to what they can fit together in a capital stack to try and make these things work. And this is everything from not only the funds that were developed this year, but we have rural funding to purchase land and do pre-development costs in rural Utah. We have the first-time homebuyer program. So, I mean, the stacking can be pretty significant. We just need all of the chips laid out so we can play stack the cake. I don't know. I don't have a better analogy, but hopefully that's helpful.
Christina, thanks so much. Mr. Chair, unless anybody else wants to add any commentary, we'll kick it back to you. You as a former legislator and appropriations leader, you've been through this before, but you must make you shake your head to see, as the years go by, the budget now being at $29 billion. Utah's growing fast, and the work is keeping up with that. Muriel, you have a comment?
I was just going to say, kind of building on the conversation today, would love to see how we can best utilize these new policy levers. And also to kind of implement the Wasatch Choice vision, right? How do we overlay all these various tools in a matrix or some kind of cake layering? I like that analogy because there's sugar involved. But to really implement some of the centers, because not all centers are going to be like a downtown Salt Lake, right? And now we have some really innovative policy levers that we can employ to really implement the vision in a very big way. You know, what's that saying, like, never waste a crisis? And unfortunately, sorry, my microphone keeps cutting out. But like, let's actually use these tools to like implement the vision, kind of look at that center development. Maybe there's some resources through TLC, but would love to kind of see how we layer that together, and then the role that this committee and WFRC can play to make it happen.
Andrew, we ready to move ahead? Anyone else have a comment there in the room or online?
Nope, we're ready.
All right, so Andrew, you're exactly right. This 28 billion, 29 billion budget we saw. So just to give a little reminder where we were, 2008, my first year in the legislature, I thought it was a huge budget when we dealt with about a 10 billion, I think it was 9.8 to be exact, which I thought was a substantial amount of money. Obviously in today's world, it didn't mean much, but I'm happy to see from housing, water, a lot of the bills that passed. I had a number of conversations with some of my former colleagues, and I was happy to see, especially with the housing initiatives, they dealt with the primary issue, which is inventory. We've got a supply and demand. The economic EO 101 is how do you increase the supply? And it appears to me with the legislation that came through, by creating those public-private partnerships, not being just government giveaways, which we've seen on occasion, we bring the private sector in that actually has the ability to increase inventory, not just throw money without having any end game. And I think the same thing, because of what we saw over the last 2 years with water, also kind of made the forefront is let's see the deliverables, let's see the outcomes before we just continue to throw money at a problem without really having a solution. So I think overall, I'm going to give them a B+ rating this year. Some of the bills I don't think were what I would call extremely user-friendly to some of the political subdivisions, but we'll be addressing some of those through interim as we move forward. But Andrew, Ginger, Christina, thanks for your input on those legislative issues that we saw. With no further comment, let's go now to our next agenda item, which is the SIDS implementation priorities. Marcia, this was corroborated and put to the committee vote, I believe in 2023, approved by this committee as far as what tasks need to be completed in 2024 through 2028. Will you just take a few minutes and explain what we're looking for as this committee to develop under the SIDS program for 2024?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be really brief as well. So we passed the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy in 2023. It was adopted by the EDA in October. With that, Muriel, thank you for that introduction, because let me see if I can move this forward. Thanks. So I just want to remind everyone, we came out with 4 anchors, creating city and town centers, economic development capacity, diverse business environment, and human capital is our 4 focus areas. And just with that, we were tasked with moving it forward. So you'll see that we had 43 different tasks. I will send this out to you as well as some other things as we get towards the end of this. But I want you to know that city and town centers, we have tasks, the economic development capacity, just we created these tasks, but we also created metrics. And if you remember correctly, that I just didn't want to produce outputs. I wanted to make sure that we had outcomes. So each of these metrics are related to an outcome of sorts. I have sat down with Megan and Ted, and this is a very tiny spreadsheet, and I will also send this out to you as well. But Muriel, this is to your point, and this is what I'm talking about. We cannot do it all. There's 43 tasks. There's obviously very hard to get through some of them. The other part of it is some of it's not, it doesn't set, or it's not mine. It's not mine to take on. It's maybe an educational institution, or it's a strategic partner that we have. And so these are the top priorities, what I called number 1 and 2 priorities. And I'm just going to talk about, there's one on here, B4, it's down there. It says, educate cities and counties about opportunities for funding capital assets and the development of community reinvestment areas. This just goes along with what Christina said, is that she's getting a group of people together to come up with a matrix, to try to come up with tools. And so what I'll do then is hopefully work with Christina, or hopefully she'll give me that information, and then we will be able to get it out to our group of people. And so this is how we can build upon not just what the state's doing and recommending, but how we can actually help implement it. And so I wanted you to know that we're really trying to work on these tasks. We're not just letting it be in a binder and sit on a desk. We're really trying to work through quite a few of these. Some of them are directed by the EDA, so we have to do them, and some of them are actually directed by a strategic plan or a comprehensive economic development strategy that the state did. And so we're really trying to incorporate a lot of the things that people are doing outside within our tasks as well. And so I just wanted you to see this. I know it's very difficult to see, but we're working through these, and more to come. And as we move through these, you will be the first to know if we are, how we are fulfilling these. So.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, if I could add a little bit.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to make the framework around this really clear, right? We have this Wasatch Choice Vision, and that's what this, everything we do here at Wasatch Front Regional Council and with our partners really filters through the Wasatch Choice Vision, and the comprehensive economic development strategy is the economic development arm of that. And working with the state economic development strategy, and working with the EDA, and working with this committee and all of the stakeholders that are served by the EDD, we came up with all of these strategies. And so the tiny words you were seeing on the screen, that's not even all of them. But now our charge is to take what we can control, knowing that that's comprehensive economic development strategy did pull in so many partners, and we were working together on that, not taking necessarily responsibility under Marcia for all of that long list, knowing that list is too big for just this committee to bite off. We're trying to really focus in on what we can do, and then partner in the other critical areas. So it's not that we've abandoned the rest of the list, but at some point you got to get the highlighter out. And so that's what you're kind of looking at here. And we want to be making sure we communicate with you all as we march down that path. So.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Marcia, anything else?
No, Chair. I want to really go back and thank everybody that participated in that, whether that was focus groups or our stakeholders or surveys and interviews. And it really was a very I thought it was a really great document and really focused on the Wasatch Choice Vision. And we are excited to continue to work with moving those tasks forward. So
Great.
thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that clarification. So as we discussed the comprehensive economic development strategy, one of the components, one of the tasks that we were given was to implementation of broadband across our region. And we have with us, I think she's still with us, Rebecca Deal, who's with the Utah Broadband Center. And they've been working not just within our region, but across the state to see what could happen with broadband. So Rebecca, are you with us? And if so, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Yes, I
Chair,
am.
she is.
Thank you.
There
Thank
you
you
go.
very much. Thank you. Rebecca Dilge, I'm the director of the Utah Broadband Center. Thank you for that great introduction. And I have a slide presentation here. I'm going to quickly go through talking again, if you have not heard already, about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. It's a federal program as part of the IIJA that you may be familiar with, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So this is a lot of funding that's going to all the states, and Utah is also getting its fair share of funding to actually get broadband and high-speed internet to the last homes and businesses that are missing it. So we sometimes can take it for granted for what we have when it comes to the internet. We have three aspects that we are looking at. So we look at availability, accessibility, and affordability in our plan. We put together a 5-year plan. We too have been out pestering communities and counties and AOGs about what they see in 5 years. What's our plan? What needs to be done? What's missing? And we have some missing infrastructure in some areas. Commissioner Fackrell, he's calling me constantly or texting me, and he lets me know what's missing up there in Morgan County. Accessibility is the devices. It's do people have access to it? Can they afford it? Do they know how to use it? Do they know how to use it safely? And we're talking about marginalized communities. We're talking about seniors. We're talking about, you look at how much today is done online, even with the government. If you want to get your driver's license renewed, you don't fill out a paper form even in the office anymore. It's all online, and we are leaving people behind if they do not have access to this. And then the last one, of course, is affordability. Depending upon where we live in the rural areas, it can cost more to get that there. So with this grant funding that is coming, it's interesting because the state of Utah was given through the Capital Projects Fund, ARPA funds, $10 million. This was the first ever grant the state of Utah administered for broadband to help in that aspect. We are now getting $317 million. So it's a huge difference in that. And there are some requirements to getting this funding. So getting the plan together. Now before we can open our grant, we have to get approval through our federal agent overseer, which is the National Telecommunications Information Administration, to make sure that we know where those locations are that are not served. Because this money is not to be used to overbuild. We don't want to be, we need to be very frugal with it. 317 million sounds like a lot, but in the state of Utah, that's not enough to get fiber optics to every household. And we know that we can only do a percentage of that, and the rest is going to need to be another technology, such as a wireless license. But we know that there are missing locations, even within maybe the Salt Lake Valley, where people have been missed, where we had a provider that came in one direction, another provider that came in the other, and there are little islands, little donut holes, we call them, of locations that are missing and do not have the high-speed internet. They may have an antiquated, DSL line, something that's copper. If you have something like that, it's not able to support the amount of devices that we are using in the household today. And we're not talking about just computers, we're talking about sprinklers and refrigerators and music and all kinds of things like this. This is not looking to just today, this is a future. So this is our future investment. It's a once in a lifetime investment that we're getting from the federal government. So What we need to do is we need to make sure we're not missing any of those locations where there is not high-speed internet. We have a map. We're using the map from the Federal Communications Center, the FCC, and anybody can go to their website, map FCC, and you can see your location. You can type in your address and you can see if you have showing it served or not served with the best technology, not just satellite. It'll show up first satellite, don't count that. So we need to know if there's something that's showing served, but it's really not. And this is where we actually still need your help. I'm not just telling you this. This is something that we're asking for your help as communities and agencies that support the communities. So we will have a challenge portal. In fact, our portal is built. We are just waiting now for a final approval from NTIA that our process is in place and accepted. Challengers will be able to access the portal and using, in addition to that, some help will be the FCC Fabric license. We're encouraging communities to apply for this if they have a robust GIS department. If they do not, I'm hoping that the Wasatch Front Regional Council will be willing to help support any communities with this effort. This FCC Fabric license, it takes a couple of weeks to apply for, but with that, you're able to download all the data. It's not just one-off looking at the map and, pinpointing different locations. It would just be more useful if you have large areas. If not, it doesn't matter. You can still participate in the challenge. The challenges will be submitted to ISPs we have on here, which means internet service providers. So if we know there's any locations where showing served but it shouldn't, or otherwise if it's showing unserved but a provider might say, I know that's served, they can submit the challenge. And then this will then go to that internet service provider to rebut, to prove otherwise. And then if we do get a rebut, then the state will be the adjudicator for this. What we have right now, what we're showing right now is approximately 43,500 unserved locations in the state of Utah, across the state. And some of them you can see are even along the Wasatch Front. Underserved locations, so that means you may have broadband or a level of high-speed internet, but you don't have the capacity of up to 100 megabits per second download. So we are looking to the future. It's not just today, as I said, we want to be able to have the capacity for the future. And we have 22,000 locations of that. Now, when we look at this, we can realize that there is over 1 million broadband serviceable locations in the state of Utah. So we don't really have a lot of missing locations in comparison, but these are probably the most expensive, and that's why they haven't been built out. And so this is where this funding will be of value and will be an incentive to internet service providers, working with the communities, engaging with them, and tribal governments as well to serve these final locations. I just wanted to point out also that we're waiting right now on our final approval for NTIA because we have also used, I want to just skip ahead because I just wanted to mention that we can use speed tests. So if you have individuals that they want to do a speed test, we have a place in the portal where they can do this because the eligible challengers do not include individuals. The eligible challengers are internet service providers, local and tribal governments, and nonprofit organizations. And they're the only entities that can actually make a challenge. This is based on the NTIA requirements. So we will have a nonprofit that's actually going to collect any of the speed test challenges, and then they are going to resubmit them to the state of Utah. The process for doing speed test challenges, they'll have to do 3 speed tests on 3 separate days for an individual household to be able to challenge that, or a business to challenge that. A provider will then have to rebut with more speed tests than that. But we would encourage that. And like I was saying, one of the reasons we have not been approved yet is we have purchased a lot of speed tests that people have been doing across the state over this last year. And lo and behold, using a rigorous method, we have actually, like I said, we're waiting for this approval. We have come up with almost an additional 30,000 locations that are looking like they're underserved. until we hear from the providers and they rebut on that. So we can see how important it is and valuable that is for people to participate and do a challenge. We have an entity, it's called Transcend. They're a nonprofit in the state in Salt Lake City. And right now they're going to offer a grant to any community that would like to have some help. Is it a $2,500 grant, up to $2,500 to help pay to, if you know, there's some locations where you want to do some speed tests and then communities want to apply for that and support that effort. So this is, we're also looking for eligible community anchor institutions, if there's any locations. Typically, we're looking at schools, hospitals, libraries. So our Utah Education Telehealth Network has been fabulous about getting these places connected. There's most of the schools do have very good high-speed gig speed to the schools. We're also looking for public safety locations in any of the communities. We've expanded our list of community anchor institutions that can be even some all faith-based organizations. If this is the only place in a community that is available where people could actually come and have access on a larger scale for multiple use. So this will also be part of our challenge process. This is our timeline for this challenge. We don't have a date on it. We thought we were going to be able to start at the end of January, and then it's gone to February, and now we're into March because we've been having to go back and forth with NTIA to get this approval and then making these adjustments because we're wanting to make this map really accurate. But once it begins, the first 10 days is just going to be open, that there will be access to those that have registered. And we have people, organizations, entities registering now will be able to have full access. So right now you just see a dot on the location, but once it's open, then you will have access to addresses and much more information, identifiable information on each location.
Rebecca,
Then,
can I just please clarify one thing?
Sure.
In terms of the locations that are unserved or underserved, can you just clarify, could it be a single residence, or is it a neighborhood, or is it a community anchor institution, or all of the above?
All of the above, all of the above.
Okay.
So we're looking for single locations. We're looking for multi-dwelling unit locations also. So
Okay.
if we know, like an apartment building is served, is each of the units served? Do they actually have access to it?
And it's actual access, not the ability to have access. For example, if you live in a
It's the,
community
it is availability. It's not what we talked about before. That's another piece of affordability. This is, do they have the infrastructure?
So for example, I live in Mill Creek, and it's an option for Mill Creek residents to have Google Fiber come to their home, your home, but you have to pay for it. And so there, it's available. So that's not what the challenge is about. It's the separate question of whether you can afford to have it come to your home.
Right, and
Okay.
that is not part of this challenge process. So is the infrastructure alone.
Thank you.
Right, and when we're talking about Google or any of these internet service providers, when a provider says, oh, I can get it to you, but it's going to take a couple of months or it's going to take a month, it has to be done within 10 days. You have to be able to get it within 10 days, and it has to be within like is it a fair market value? So it can't be exceeding, it can't be like $1,000, $2,000. It needs to be, a fair price based on like a neighborhood. Like if we've got a neighborhood that's behind another neighborhood, and we've had an internet service provider say, look, we don't have lines, our fiber might run down this other street, but it's going to cost $10,000 to get it over there, then that's considered unserved. Yeah, thanks. So the challenge process itself is only going to last 40 days for challenges. So it's very quick. That's why we're trying to prepare everyone. The providers will have 40 days to rebut, and then we will just have 30 days to make a decision. And then once that's done, we will create our map, finalize the map, submit to NTIA, and then we will turn and hopefully start our grant program probably the end of summer or later, as it seems to be playing out. So looking for your help. And if there's any other questions, I will just change to my last page here. I do have a QR code that will take you to connectingutah.com. This is the website We've created and are using, we have on there our plan, our initial proposal, access, how to get the fabric license, there's slides that, and training, a summary of this challenge process and the connectingutah.com challenge process portal to get into it, to register. And those dates are what we had done, webinars, and they are recorded so you can watch them. Okay? Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Any questions or other comments for Rebecca before she leaves?
Mr. Chair, I just want to commend the effort and all the work that I'm sure multiple people on this call are putting in to extending the broadband network. It's a huge lever for economic opportunity, and particularly for our rural areas. So it's much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly right. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, if I'd be curious from particularly the local elected officials in the room, what's your sense in your communities of whether there are or are not gaps in the availability of broadband service? And maybe that differs in some of the more urban areas compared to the more rural areas, but just, I don't know, anybody want to volunteer whether in your community you have gaps or you think you're pretty well covered?
I'd be glad to start. And Rebecca and Claire both know that, but our county in itself.
That's Morgan County.
Morgan County, yeah. Morgan County in itself, we are underserved and in many places unserved. Even though we may have Wi-Fi, and in the city, they already have Utopia network and it works good there. As far as affordability, you know, I'll pay whatever it takes to get internet because it's like our power. If we don't have power, you can't do any work. If you don't have internet, you can't do any work. And so even in agricultural areas, we need the internet. And if we're getting 30 megabytes, it's not enough.
Thank you. Mayor Lang, did I see you on mute to comment on this?
Yes, with our Comcast, Utopia, West Valley City is pretty built out as far as broadband.
See Rebecca nodding, like maybe that's not a surprise.
Oh, that's great. Our providers have done an excellent job. That's why I think our numbers are so small compared to the number of, like I said, over 1 million broadband serviceable locations. But those that are missing are, like I said, they are the most expensive and the hardest to get to. So this is our opportunity. We want to make sure we know where those are.
Mayor Wynn, how about Tooele City?
So Tooele City is kind of hit and miss at this point. I believe everyone pretty much has access to internet service, but not the high speed and the fiber. But All West has been in our community now for about a year. I think they still have another 1.5 years to go to get to everyone. But when they are completed with their project, everyone here should have that opportunity. I don't know if it'll all be affordable, but they will have access.
And we're really excited about that too, because a lot of the internet service providers learned about this. This came out a couple of years ago. So we kind of have this joke of another program that we're promoting. It's called Beat BEAD, like get in there and build it out. Don't wait for the BEAD funds, get it done.
Commissioner Flores, Weber County pretty well covered, or some areas like in Western Weber still not?
Yeah, great question. So we've really been fortunate over the past year and a half with the ARPA funding. We've seen major changes in the upper Ogden Valley, Eastern Weber County. Thanks to a lot of our providers up there, they've taken upon themselves. We've granted a lot of easements for fiber. So Eastern Ogden Valley is substantially better than it was 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Western Weber County still has pockets, and we also surprisingly have areas that would be the south part of our county that have service, but I would say that it's not the quality of service that we would expect those people to have. And I would just add that I think we've all heard, I've heard several times from Governor Cox that good infrastructure makes good development. We think of infrastructure, at least if you look back over the last several years, of being water, sewer, electricity, gas. Well, we now know that you've got to have internet as part of that infrastructure, or it doesn't build good communities or good neighborhoods. So I appreciate Rebecca and Utah Broadband doing what they can to use those funds to make it more available, accessible, and hopefully affordable as well. So
So,
that's where we are with Weber County.
hey, Mike, Mike, just curious, there's what, 25,000 people that are on base. How about your broadband and 30,000? Yeah, sorry.
So for the latest economic impact study, we've just gone over 30,000 that both work and live at Hill Air Force Base. Broadband on the official side of it is obviously provided from some of our high-speed lines that we have that connect and serve, the professional business side of what we do at Hill. The rest of it is actually provided by commercial service providers. We have two that are on the base. I would throw them out, but I don't want to make sure. I want to make sure I'd get them right because we've been in negotiations with a couple of different service providers that have had interest. Some of that has come down to negotiations with them actually using the legacy lines that we have in there and whether or not they're going to upgrade. So that's where a lot of those discussions have been. Very similar to what we heard here, building out the infrastructure. So just because you live and work at Hill Air Force Base, the vast majority of the people have access on the business side to one speed, and then the residents who live there, something considerably different, and also only available from the economy. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So it's just not a city or a county.
It's kind of our own city.
Yeah.
And, we struggle with some of the same accessibility issues as well when we're looking on the commercial side, because it cannot ride on, the official, what we call the NIPRNet, the non-secure network. And obviously on the secure side of it, it stays off of there, obviously.
There we go. Anything else?
I'm just gonna say, you may be interested to know Steve Green, who is here with us. He actually worked. He is broadband background and he worked on the base. That's where we picked him up from. He was actually building that, working with the provider there to build that out. So
Good to know. Additional comments, questions before we move on? All right. Great meeting. I want to thank those presenters that have taken their time out. I think we've found some value in all these presentations. Hopefully you can take that back to your communities, councils, commission offices, and make sure we spread this word. So with that, we are fortunate being the first meeting of the year. We go through this every year. A little update on the Utah Public Meeting Act that's required by the state. And as a committee member, especially for our new members, it's required that you review the Utah Public Meeting Act. We're going to do that by virtue of having a video that Rosie's going to start in just a few minutes, but we'd encourage you to stay on, look at that video for those that haven't seen it. I think you'll find it informative. And then we also meet with state code, which is fairly important to do. So with that, I would like a motion that we adjourn effective after the training, because we have to actually keep the meeting active until after that meeting. So I would look for a motion and a second to adjourn after the completion of that video, if I might.
So moved, Chairman.
Thank
I'll
you,
second.
Madam Vice Chair. And I think we had a second.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All those in favor, I'm going to place the motions. Please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
I'm going to rule the motion carries. So just before we start that video, again, thanks to all those presenters. Thanks those for members of the committee that have taken their time out. I think you'll find it very effective and we appreciate your involvement with this committee. Before we actually start that video, I asked Rosie to start it. Any other business before we start the video? Now's your opportunity. All right, seeing none, our next meeting will be June 11th, 2024. We look for you to be there. Again, hopefully we can have some in person. I plan on being there myself, so we could have some in person. I think it's always a little more valuable, but I appreciate the opportunity to have a Zoom meeting when doesn't quite fit in. So with no further comments or other business, Rosie, if you'd like to start that video. We'll see you next in June.
So what's the Open and Public Meetings Act? It's the state law that ensures government actions and deliberations are openly conducted. Before we continue, keep in mind that this video is an overview, and exceptions may exist based on your entity type. So what's considered an open and public meeting? It's when a governing body majority meets to discuss or act upon government business. It includes the meetings sometimes referred to as workshops or executive sessions. Regular meetings, public hearings, electronic meetings, and emergency meetings are all open and public meetings. Open and public meetings don't include chance or social meetings. A public hearing is a type of open and public meeting where citizens have a reasonable opportunity to speak. Public hearings happen when a government adopts a budget or imposes or increases taxes or fees. An electronic meeting is a type of open and public meeting that's convened electronically, such as via phone or the internet. Remember, the governing body must adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing and governing electronic meetings. An open and public meeting may be closed to discuss any of the following: a person's character, competence, or health, security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, collective bargaining, litigation, purchase, sale, or lease of property if an open discussion would prevent the entity from completing the transaction on the best terms, investigations of criminal misconduct, and private or protected information per the Utah Procurement Code, including trade secrets. 2/3 of the governing body need to vote yes to close a meeting. Quick math lesson. 2 divided by 3 equals 66.7%. Let's say your governing body has 5 members. If 3 out of the 5 members vote yes, that equals 60%, which is not equal to or greater than 66.7%, which means you're 1 member short and instead need 4 out of 5 members to vote yes. During a closed meeting, a governing body can't interview someone applying to fill an elected position, discuss filling a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, discuss the character, competence, or health of a person whose name was submitted for consideration to fill a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, or approve any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment. If a closed meeting is discussing a person's character, competence, or health, or security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, no recording or minutes are required. However, the presiding member needs to sign a sworn written statement stating such. If the closed meeting is held for any other reason, a recording must be made. Emergency meetings may be held to discuss an urgent matter due to unforeseen circumstances. In order to hold the meeting, the best notice that's feasible is provided of the time, location, and topics to be considered. An attempt is made to contact all governing body members, and a governing body majority approves the meeting. Entities that hold regular meetings need to provide notice at least annually of the year's meeting schedule. As always, the notice must include date, time, and place. For entities that don't hold regularly scheduled regular meetings, 24 hours notice must be provided. All meetings, whether regularly scheduled in advance over the course of the year or scheduled as needed, must provide no less than 24 hours notice of meeting agendas. If a public hearing is held, public notice requirements change. Make sure to distinguish between regular meeting notice requirements and public hearing notice requirements. For regular meetings, an entity is only required to notify a newspaper and doesn't need to pay to publish a notice. For public hearings, notice must be published in at least one issue of a newspaper. If a newspaper of general circulation isn't available, written notice is posted in 3 public places within the entity's boundaries. Regular meetings require 24 hours notice. Public hearings require 7 days notice. For both regular meetings and public hearings, written notice must be posted at the principal office of the governing body, or, if no such office exists, at the building where the meeting will be held. Governing bodies must also provide notice of open and public meetings on the Public Notice website at publicnotice.utah.gov. By posting on the website and providing the email of the local newspaper, governing bodies can also meet the requirement to notify a newspaper. However, other requirements such as publishing in a newspaper still apply. Typically, posting on the Public Notice website is done by the records officer, recorder, or clerk. However, it's the governing body's responsibility to ensure notice is provided. State Archives has prepared a training manual and quick guide for owners and posters, as well as training videos that can be accessed at their website at archives.utah.gov. If your entity is increasing a fee or undergoing truth and taxation for a property tax increase, be aware that there are additional notice and posting requirements. Public meeting agendas need to include reasonably specified topics to be considered, with each topic listed under a separate agenda item on the meeting agenda. The governing body may not consider a topic in an open meeting that wasn't on the agenda. If a new topic not on the agenda is raised by the public during an open meeting, the governing body may discuss the topic. However, final action may not be taken on the new topic during that meeting. Meeting minutes and an audio recording are required for all open meetings, with limited exceptions. When an open or closed meeting is required to be recorded, it must be unedited and contain all the portions of the meeting. Recordings of open meetings must be made available within 3 days. Every entity needs to establish procedures for the governing body's approval of minutes. Pending minutes are written minutes prepared in draft form and are subject to change before being approved by the governing body. Pending minutes must contain a clear indication, such as a draft or pending watermark, that the governing body hasn't yet approved the minutes and that they're subject to change. Pending minutes must be made available within 30 days. Approved minutes are written minutes of a meeting that have been approved by the governing body. Approved minutes are the official record of the meeting and must be made available within 3 business days. Whoever is responsible for taking the minutes during meetings, typically the records officer, recorder, or clerk, needs to be familiar with what OPMA requires be contained in the minutes. When a governing body closes a meeting, the following must be publicly announced and entered into the minutes of the open meeting at which the closed meeting was approved. The reason or reasons for holding the closed meeting, the location where the closed meeting will be held, and the vote of each member of the governing body either for or against the motion to close the meeting. The recording and any minutes must include the date, time, and location of the meeting, the names of the governing body members present and absent, and the names of all others present except where disclosure would infringe on the confidentiality necessary to fulfill the original purpose of closing the meeting. For more information, access our local government resource center at resources.auditor.utah.gov.